Warm words and a warning from Secretary of State Marco Rubio to the leaders of Europe more broadly. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, the Secretary of State said the Western world risks civilizational erasure if historical allies do not stick together. With us now for analysis is Kervin Aucoin, former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for the U.S. Army and host of the This Week Explained podcast. Great to have you on again, Kervin. And we actually spoke yesterday on the same topic. And when we spoke, you mentioned that Rubio took a very different approach from Vice President Vance last year, who gave the same speech at the conference. And at the time, he chastised European countries for their open borders and for many other policies that they were carrying out. Do you see this particular shift as a sign of a change in the underlying dynamics here from the U.S. to Europe more broadly?
Well, I think putting both of them, combine them together, get to the middle there. And yeah, that's a change in U.S. rhetoric towards Europe. But what I think you're seeing here are two people aligning themselves for the 2028 presidential election with two very, maybe not very different ideologies towards Europe. You've got J.D. Vance on one end, who chastises the European nations for their open borders. And then you have Marco Rubio, the statesman, on the other side, saying that while that is correct, that Europe is on the decline, there is a chance to turn this around, and that is to be done on their own and not united with the United States. But it's not without the United States either. The U.S. needs to see that Europe is going to take care of its own borders and its own continent and live up to what NATO stands for, which is a collective, a group that is equal with each other.
And all this is very dynamic at the moment, and there's plenty of time before the next presidential election. But in terms of that approach, each one that you've outlaid here, which one do you think will work most with European leaders right now?
Well, obviously, J.D. Vance is playing to a domestic audience in the United States, and Marco Rubio is playing to a broader global audience. So, yeah, absolutely, Marco Rubio, as statesman, is going to play a lot better in Europe. We saw that. Look, I remember those moments as J.D. Vance was making his speech, panning to the audience of European leaders in shock and awe about what was being said towards them and about them. It was a much different tone and a much different post-speech conversation happening among European leaders. And I think I said this yesterday when we were speaking. I'm not so much interested in what's being publicly said between various world leaders because that's playing to a certain audience that they want to play to. What I'm very interested in are those behind-the-scenes conversations, and how do we out with those behind-the-scenes negotiations or conversations were without reading the book 5 to 10 years later, is you look at what's happening around the world days, weeks, and months after this conference. Are U.S. leaders and European leaders getting closer after all this talk of Greenland and Canada as the 51st state? Are these leaders now coming together and pushing those public conversations aside to have more direct, individual, allied conversations that go against the real threats to the United States and the globe, which is Russia and China?
Yeah, and digging into that further in terms of your expertise, Rubio, of course, is painting a very positive future, a unified future of a new Western century. With your experience in intelligence and surveillance, what would that mean on the ground for how the U.S. and Europe watch Russia and China?
Yeah, I think it's a unified intelligence sharing. Like I said, right now, we do not have unified intelligence sharing. We have the United States doing the bulk of the intelligence collection and providing that to our allies. With the allies receiving that and accepting that, getting trained in U.S. military tactics, intelligence tradecraft. But when we talk about partner sharing, there's not as much sharing on the European side to the U.S. side. Now, that is because the United States has one of the best intelligence communities, and we have spent years in the global war on terrorism building out that intelligence tradecraft. So now Europe needs to take the lessons that they've learned from the United States and use that on their own borders and along the borders of Ukraine in order to push back against Russia. For too long, the Western Europe has allowed Russia to just play in the media this misinformation game towards a lot of their populations without really much pushback.
And I know that you've worked on missions near Russia. What signals do you look for to judge whether Moscow is preparing for escalation or is serious about negotiations, especially given Rubio's doubts about Russia's intentions? Just in our last 30 seconds. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with Marco Rubio on this one. I don't believe that Russia has any intent to negotiate in good faith. While I was in Poland in overt anti-Russian aggression, we were attacked in the media with Russian state media that the U.S. was there to do nefarious things in the borders of Poland. So I'd be looking for messaging in that, more messaging that NATO is the problem, is the enemy, and then look for more strikes on Ukraine, and then that push of more troops along the border that will tell us that Russia's ready for another attack.
Certainly a lot to watch out for in the coming days and weeks. Thank you so much for your insights this morning, and good to see you again, Kervin Aucoin.
As always, thank you so much, and stay safe out there.